If your campaign suddenly jumped 14 months into the future, would your campaign be able to hold together? This actually happened to me in a Numenera game I was running. One of the characters picked up a cipher, a very small, single-use magic item, that jumped the entire group of characters 14 months into the future of the campaign. I almost decided to roll it back, but then I started thinking about it and what a tremendous and interesting change it would have for the campaign. So I called for a break, and then I spent just a little bit of time thinking about how the events of the campaign would roll forward 14 months into a new type of campaign that was very interesting. I was able to do this because the campaign was relatively robust. It could handle large changes in the story and still move forward into new and interesting directions that we were all excited about. When you're looking at your own campaign, you can ask yourself, how robust is this campaign that I'm building? But of course, you have to ask, what is a robust campaign? For me, a robust campaign is one that's able to have major shifts in the story based on the actions of the characters and the reactions of the world around them. These could be really big events, like finding a super powerful artifact, or changing an alliance with a major ally, or finding a new villain that you hadn't even thought of before. A robust campaign is one where a major change can occur in the campaign, and the campaign can still go forward into new and interesting directions. Now, a lot of times when DMs plan out their campaign, they have an arc in mind. They kind of know what all of the major beats of the campaign are going to be. They have big scenes in mind. They have big set pieces they plan on running. They have villains and climactic battles that they're planning to run at certain points in the campaign. But what happens if the campaign takes a big shift? What happens if it turns out that that major villain you thought they were going to fight got defeated early? Or maybe they ended up becoming an ally? What if the characters got some really powerful weapon that they didn't have before that they could use to defeat a villain that you thought was going to be really hard? When we're building out our campaign, we can think about how we can build our campaign to be more robust, to handle these big changes. So what do we do to actually build a robust campaign? What does that look like if we want to run something like this? First, we want to have a loose grip on the story. We don't really want to have a huge outline or a huge plan, a giant document that diagrams every single scene that's going to take place. In particular, we don't want to define what's going to happen based on certain choices that the character is going to make, because we don't know if they're going to make them. We don't know what kind of choices are actually going to land in front of them. It can't hurt to have a rough outline of the way you think the campaign is going to go, but probably more than a page with just a list of the big beats that's probably about as much as we need. And instead, we can focus our time and attention on the next session we're going to run. This is a big tip from Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master and lazy DMing in general, which is focus on your next session. It's really the only session that matters. All of the sessions after that could change dramatically depending on what happens in the next session. So generally speaking, we want to worry about what's going to happen in the next session and maybe plant the seeds for what's going to happen in the session after that. But that's about as far as we really want to detail things out. Now, when we're thinking about the campaign after that, though, can't hurt to have an outline of what you think the major beats are going to be. But we should be prepared to throw that out completely based on the choices the characters make and based on the way the story goes from those choices. Another thing we can do is focusing on the villains of our campaign. I like to think of 3 different villains in any given campaign. Who are they? What are their major goals? And what are the quests that the villains are undertaking in order to achieve those goals? When we think about it this way, the villains are moving objects. Villains are entities that are doing things in the campaign while the characters are doing what they're doing as well. They're not just static set piece boss fights. They are actually off doing quests, sending minions out to do things, to accomplish their own goals. And we don't know which goals are going to get accomplished and which ones are going to get thwarted, which villains the characters are going to pay attention to and which ones they're going to ignore. We don't really know any of these things, but we know that those villains are moving. And because we have villains and we know what their objectives are and we know what quests they're undertaking, if something happens like a 14-month jump in the timeline, we can just move all of those quests forward. We know that they've accomplished a bunch of things that they had planned to accomplish. And what does the world look like then? And that is a really interesting question to ask. It's far better than worrying about which parts of your super thick campaign got shattered because the characters made a choice or because the direction went in a way you didn't expect. The other thing we can do is set up big opportunities for change. Instead of just being prepared for change, we can actually put things in the campaign that offer up opportunities for these big changes. An example would be an alliance with a really powerful entity. Maybe the entity isn't exactly good or bad. Maybe it's like a trapped vampire, or maybe it's an old lich that has been buried under the mountain for a long time. And maybe they're kind of evil. Maybe they're not. Maybe they're kind of above good and evil. Maybe it's a trapped fallen celestial or something like that. We don't know if they're going to make an alliance with one of these entities or not, but if they do, it could tremendously change things. Another way to set up a big opportunity for change is to drop in really powerful magic items, powerful relics, or powerful spells. Give them things that are well outside of the power of the characters. What if your characters got a hold of a luck blade that still had one wish on it? What are they going to do with that wish? What if your low-level characters have an an artifact that can cast Circle of Death one time, this huge blast that'll kill many, many creatures if they use it at the right time. When you give them items like this, you don't know how they're going to come into play. Are they going to completely destroy a boss fight with one use of an artifact? Maybe, but they will surely remember it. Other opportunities for big changes in our campaigns can also come from powerful artifacts or relics. Maybe they find a gateway that can take them to another world. Maybe they find an artifact that can either roll back time or push time into the future. Maybe they find an artifact that could destroy an entire city. Maybe they find a trapped entity, either a really powerful relic, a really powerful intelligence shield, perhaps possessed by a very, very powerful archdevil, or they find a vampire that's been trapped in a sarcophagus for 1,000 years, who is really happy with the fact that the characters rescued them. There's lots of ways of adding in interesting artifacts, interesting monuments that could have substantial changes to the story, depending on whether the characters find them and what they decide to do with them when they have. Another opportunity for big change is when alliances break down or new alliances form. Maybe that ancient red dragon that the characters were thinking of hunting down in the latter part of their campaign ends up becoming an ally of theirs to thwart another villain that they were facing somewhere else. Likewise, maybe an ally that they've had for a long time changes their heart and now becomes a villain. When we think of each of the entities, each of the major NPCs as potentially a villain or potentially an ally, depending on how things go, we don't have any control over which direction the story is going to go. And by not having that control and knowing we don't have that control, that makes our campaign a little bit more robust because we can't plan out a brittle campaign against any one path. We know that we have to leave ourselves open for these choices to be made. One way to see if you have a robust campaign is to ask yourself, if the timeline of this campaign was to jump forward a year, would I be able to move the campaign forward? What would have happened? What would the world look like then? Now, maybe you don't have some single powerful artifact that's going to transport all the characters 1 year into the future. Maybe you decide you want to add one in. But it's still worth asking yourself, what if there was an entire time skip in the campaign? What if the characters went off on some other adventures that we don't really cover during our campaign? And when they come back, the world has changed on them. What if they die in a TPK and their bodies are dug out of a charnel pit and resurrected 2 years later? What would the world look like then? This is a great way of handling TPKs. I've actually started campaigns with characters being dug out of a charnel pit centuries after evil powers have taken over the world. It's really fun. Another way to see if your campaign is relatively robust is to ask yourself, what if you were to drop in a new random villain? What if you took a book like Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft or The Lazy DM's Companion and you rolled up randomly a new villain from these books and decided to drop it into your campaign and make them a major villain? Would your campaign be able to shift and move and survive with this new villain in there? I did this with my Wild Beyond the Witchlight game and my Dreadful Incursions. I decided to have various domains of dread that were bleeding into the world of Prismeer in Wild Beyond the Witchlight, and I would roll randomly in Van Richten's Guide to find out which villain was going to break their way into Prismeer. Completely changed my campaign in a way I couldn't expect, and it all came from a single die roll. Big changes in our campaign can lead to some of the most fun we can have in our campaigns. The more we build robust campaigns and offer opportunities for our campaigns to change directions in ways we never thought of, the more fun you're going to have with your own campaign and the more fun your player's going to have as all of you together watch the story go off in directions you had never thought of. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, you can help me out by subscribing to the Sly Flourish newsletter, supporting me directly on Patreon, picking up any of my books, or liking this video or subscribing to my YouTube channel. Thank you very much. Have a great day and get out there and play some D&D.